Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1975. We're going to be taking a look at Glen Campbell and he's going to be playing through his instrumental version of Ain't No Sunshine, just playing lead guitar here. I'm going to let this play the whole way through because it's only 2 minutes and 25 seconds in length, and then we'll get into the analysis afterwards. So let's get Glen up on screen and see how he gets on. And there we have it. The great thing about this video is that it showcases Glen Campbell, the guitarist, the lead guitarist, and this performance really does show you that Glen Campbell was a standalone lead guitarist. The difference with Glen is that because he was an award-winning vocalist in terms of Gentle on My Mind, winning a Grammy for that particular vocal, and that was written by John Hartford, having the ability to sell somebody else's song with your voice, make it like your own song, the way that it is delivered. Glen had that ability vocally, but he also had this ability on the fretboard. But because of that vocal ability, I think a lot of people, especially if they didn't play guitar, wouldn't know the level that Glen Campbell was up to on that fretboard. And here we get a showcase of so many different techniques, super clean tone as well. So you know that Glen's technique on the fretboard was A1 because we're not getting any buzzing here, any other strings ringing out. And this particular performance, there's so much in here from Glen, just tiny little bends that he'll throw in, the slides as well. There's some side to side vibrato, but he'll also throw in rock, blues, vibrato, and the phrasing that he puts into the lines, which maintain the groove of the backing. By the way, quick word for that backing band because they are so spot on, and also the way that Glen controls it at the end is all totally live. One of these things that you got back in the 70s, 1975 here, A totally live performance with Glen and his band. This is from the Glen Campbell music show, I believe. So it's all totally under his instruction, and they just draw it out at the end. It is so well put together, and the overall groove and feel of that backing band is replicated in Glen's playing. And again, that's something that you've got to have an appreciation of that groove to then inject it into your playing. And Glen had so much appreciation for the groove, the feel, the expression, everything, not only vocally, but instrumentally. A lot of players, especially if they sing, they either play really well and then the singing is just something that they put in there as an afterthought, and sometimes it was through a necessity of not being able to find a lead singer. And you have other guys that are great vocally and they do a little bit of guitar but aren't necessarily that technically advanced. Give him a microphone and he could keep your attention for the whole night vocally. That's all he needed. But then give him a guitar and he could do exactly the same thing. So he had such ability in two different departments that often are totally separate. These kind of videos are great to draw people's attention to because it shows how great he was as an instrumentalist and as a session player. That's the point, that Glen Campbell had the ability level of a session player without being able to read or write music. He had everything that every other session guy had, who had the education and years and years and years of playing experience. But then somehow Glen Campbell, when he got his vocal cords involved, had such an amazing voice and an expressive voice, an engaging voice. So he was everything you wanted in an artist and a session player rolled into one. The thing that sticks out with playing is great technique with the left hand, but the organization of that right hand because of the picking direction. Once you start to throw together more technical passages like Glen's playing here, you need to be so organized with that right hand, and that's something that Glen Campbell had down to a T, the organization. And that's why guys like Van Halen took a real interest in country artists, especially Glen Campbell. And you can see the interviews with Alice Cooper because Alice was a good friend of Glen's. And having that connection with all of those hard rock and metal artists that Alice did, he would say that they'd come up to him, especially Van Halen, and talk about Glen Campbell, because the top players, when they look at Glen Campbell, they can see the details and the amount of technical proficiency that Glen had. So, talking about that right hand, a great example of his organization, obviously thrown together these lines with alternate picking, economy picking, but then also right at the end we have a little bit of sweep picking, which is when Glen is raking across the strings and he's playing that in conjunction with hammer-ons on the way up, ascending, and then as he descends, pull-offs, but still raking across those strings. So it means that the efficiency with which he's picking the strings is optimal. You can't get any more efficient than the way that Glen's doing it. Glen was a massively talented singer and guitar player, but you've got to give him his dues on the technical side, because no matter how much you know which melody you want to play and the runs you want to throw together, you've got to take your medicine and get the technical aspects down in order to make it this clean, because so many players have an idea for a run and they get it down about 85% and it's a little bit messy, but they leave it there because they don't want to put in that extra 15% of effort to make it super clean. Glen Campbell is a player, and this is why all of those rock guys looked at his picking and his technique and wanted to pick up tips from him, because he put in that extra 15%. Another thing I quickly want to mention, which is looking at things in real detail, but I find this kind of thing interesting, at 1 minute and 50, when Glen starts bending with that second finger on the G string, and then on the B string he's fretting with the third finger, what happens is, you'll know this if you play, if your bridge is not fixed down, as soon as you increase the tension on any string by bending it, it's going to decrease the tension on the other strings. So when you fret on the B string and you're bending the G string, it means that the note on the B string will be flat. You can't help that. It's basic physics. That's just how it works. So in order to counteract that as a player, you can bend the B string at the same time ever so slightly to compensate for that decrease in tension on the B string. And that's exactly what Glen does here, but the bridge is fixed down, so he doesn't need to increase that bend with the third finger. And it's great because you can hear in Glen's playing that he realizes he's not having to compensate, and he just ever so slightly decreases that tiny bend he was doing with the third finger. When you're listening to a top lead guitarist, there'll be points within a performance where their personality is constantly injected into the playing, so it's like their voice coming through the instrument, and we've certainly got that here. At 1 minute and 10 seconds, we have what would be just a straight note for any other player, but the way that Glen just tweaks that third finger, just bending it ever so slightly to put a little bit of personality into it, is one of those things that great players do on the fly and don't really plan what they're going to do at any particular point, but it's just these little expressions with single notes that can give it a personality. Another thing, at 1 minute and 38, we have a fantastic hybrid picking run that Glen just throws in there. And these combination of techniques that Glen uses, it means that throughout the whole performance, almost 2.5 minutes here, you're never bored because there's always something else that Glen can go to. Sometimes when a lead guitarist just plays for 10 or 20 seconds in the middle of a song, it's a lot easier because it's only a short window that you've got to keep people entertained for, and then you've got another lead vocal that comes in and takes the spotlight. Whereas playing an instrumental piece means that every single note, every single phrase that you throw together has to be interesting, and you can't repeat yourself, because if you do, people are going to get bored. The brain gets bored so easily when it comes to listening to a lead instrument. So the top players always have something else that they can do, another technique they can go to, another sentence they can tell you on their instrument. And that's why it's interesting to listen to, because it's a journey, it's a story. This is a really interesting performance to watch because we've got the reference point of knowing the original melody, which means that we can now listen to Glen as a lead guitarist, having that reference point and seeing where he likes to go and where he's extemporizing and where he's throwing in his different influences that come from his lead playing, especially country music, of course. He's got that blend of country, but jazz as well is something that you'll find throughout this performance, the way that he goes from standard minor pentatonic shapes here, and then he'll get into chromatics. The chromaticism that is thrown in throughout this performance is classic jazz and country. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, a chromatic scale is when you play every single note. So A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, A, and you're back to the beginning. So all of those notes, that's a chromatic scale. So when you start throwing notes in that are chromatic, you get such a jazz feel to it, and you get a fair amount of that in country music as well. They'll just throw you off that standard scale path, because normally when you're playing a major scale, for example, you will have a note that you will then jump over a sharp. So you might have A going straight to B at the beginning of the major scale. So there's a definite sound to that. Everybody will know do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is the major scale. And those are the intervals that everybody is used to. So once you start throwing in chromaticism in your playing, you get such an interesting take on a basic major scale. And it's something that Glen throws in, and he does it so well because it's so easy to throw in too much and lose your audience because they haven't got that reference point of the key and the root note. Here is a great example of using it so tastefully and melodically so that everyone's still got that reference point of the key, but Glen is throwing in these hints of jazz and hints of country throughout his playing, which, by the way, need top tier technique to get it as clear as Glen does, because the amount of technique going on here with alternate picking, all of the techniques I've already mentioned are top notch, so that you can appreciate how Glen's throwing all of these extra notes in there that wouldn't necessarily be part of your standard minor pentatonic and blues scales. So we've got that super clean tone, which means everything that we can hear is just Glen on that fretboard. A tiny bit of reverb added as well, which embellishes the sound, which is what effects should be used for, just to embellish your sound that is already great. Without the reverb, it would still sound great, and that's the point. Getting into the musical side of things, a lot of people will be saying as well that this is a minor-based guitar lead piece, and country music especially is so major based in terms of the key, and having that crossover that Glen makes here just shows that he's got all of these phrases in the minor key to put together with those country phrases that are very major, very happy sounding, and making that crossover sometimes a lot of players struggle with, to the point where a lot of hard rock players and metal players, heavier genres, are generally playing in minor keys. So when it then gets changed over to major, they struggle a little bit to find the same quality in their playing. I think in this video at about 2 minutes, it does skip forward a little bit, but it also came from tape originally, so it's a little bit wobbly in places. But this is one of those videos that I had to feature on the channel because it gives you an extended lead guitar performance from Glen Campbell that really highlights his technical ability with that right hand, the organization, and how he rolls all of these techniques into one seamlessly throughout the whole performance, and the expression that's in there as well. And there are so many lead guitarists who never sing. They just play the guitar and they can keep your attention, but they never have that ability to sell a lead vocal. Glen was in that tiny class of artists who could do both of those things to an exceptional standard. So fantastic video here of a great performance from Glen Campbell, and it's no wonder that so many fantastic guitarists look up to Glen Campbell, even though maybe people that don't play and the general population won't really appreciate how great a player Glen Campbell was on the guitar. But if I can showcase him on this channel, then maybe a few more people will understand as well. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!